started small. Little things that would have been easy to dismiss in a town like ours, a speck of a place that barely registered on the map. With a population of only 400, everyone knew everyone's business, or so we thought. My grandpa's house had always been a fixture in our town. Nestled just off the highway, right in the heart of the small downtown area, it had stood there for over 30 years. It was a place where kids gathered to play in the summer and families sat on the porch watching the stars at night. But something had shifted around 6 or 7 years ago. I was only 13 at the time and things seemed so simple then, until the strange things started happening. When my aunt moved in with Grandpa during the pandemic, it seemed like nothing more than a temporary change. Grandpa was a truck driver, always on the road, so the house often felt empty, like the walls were holding secrets they weren't ready to share. I'd stay with my aunt, and we'd pass the time coloring or listening to old stories. But sometimes the house felt too quiet, unnervingly quiet. Little bumps and knocks at night became almost routine. One evening when I was sitting in the kitchen with my aunt, she told me she had heard something odd. Metal jingling. She brushed it off as nothing, but the next day Grandpa returned from a trip to find the lock on his cellar door had been cut open, sliced clean through as if someone had used bolt cutters. That's when the real unease set in. Things escalated when my aunt's dog, a massive German Shepherd Great Pyrenees, began to bark violently at something outside. When my aunt investigated, she saw a figure standing just beyond the fence. As soon as she stepped outside, the figure bolted, disappearing into the night. That was just the beginning. A year later, my aunt moved out and things seemed to calm down at Grandpa's house, but at my place, the tension was rising. My parents worked nights, leaving me and my 2 younger brothers alone. Our sleep schedules were shot and we'd often be awake at all hours, our minds swirling with paranoia. We'd hear faint taps on the windows, footsteps outside, nothing overt but unsettling nonetheless. Twice the terror came for me directly. One night, while I slept, a hand slapped the window next to my head. I woke up to the sound of my heart pounding in my chest. The second time, when my parents were home, we heard the unmistakable sound of a camera's shutter clicking from right outside. We'd call my uncle or another family member to check the house, but each time nothing was found. No trace of anyone. It was as if the night itself was mocking us. By the time I turned 16, my aunt had moved back into Grandpa's house, but the sense of dread lingered, thicker than ever. That summer when I was 17, things reached a boiling point. It was around 2 a.m. when I was half asleep, when the sound of frantic banging on the front door jolted me awake. It sounded like a movie, the type of knock you only hear in horror films. My dog was going crazy, barking, growling, his fur standing on end. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I hesitated for a moment, deciding to ignore it, but the banging persisted, louder and more insistent. It wasn't like the police who would have said something. This was something else, something wrong. My heart raced as I reached for the phone, dialing my stepdad for advice. As I sat frozen on the floor, my brother groggily stumbled out of his room, asking what was going on. He answered the door only to find nothing. Just the empty night air. Things didn't slow down. Over the next few months, I woke up one morning to find both the front and back doors wide open. I couldn't remember leaving them that way, and none of our pets had bolted, which seemed impossible. Another time, my mom came home to find the doors blown open, our animals scattered across the yard, looking lost and disoriented. But the worst of it was happening to my aunt. It was as if something was hunting her, trying to get inside. One night, she woke up to find a man standing outside her window, holding a flashlight, his face hidden in shadow. Another time, a small red dot appeared on her chest, like a laser pointer, coming from that same window. Her dog, her only real protection when she was alone, seemed to be the next target. After letting her dog out one evening, she noticed a man slipping away behind a tree, disappearing into the darkness. Moments later, her dog began to eat something that wasn't there before. She tried to stop her, but the dog swallowed it whole before she could intervene. Soon the dog was acting strange, sick, lethargic, and crying in distress. It seemed as though someone had slipped something into the dog's food, something meant to put her down. The thought made my aunt's stomach churn. Her dog was the only thing standing between her and whatever was lurking out there. It didn't stop there. My aunt heard metal banging once again, this time coming from the cellar door. Her dog barked furiously, but when she checked, the man was already gone. Later, she discovered that the cellar doors had been opened, forcibly as if someone was trying to get inside. The terror continued, and the fence in her backyard, once sturdy, was now leaning at odd angles as though someone had been crawling over it, just out of sight of the security cameras. Even my grandpa, who had lived in that house for decades, wasn't safe. He'd heard banging on the side of the house, the kind of noise that rattled the windows, and once, it sounded like someone was body slamming the front door. But when he went outside to investigate, there was no one there. One night, his security camera captured something truly chilling. A man crouched behind the bushes near the driveway, rolling down the hill just out of my aunt's sight. The cameras had captured strange movements before, but this time it was different. This man, this shadow, was real. At first, I thought we were just being targeted, maybe singled out for some unknown reason. But when I spoke to other women in the area, I realized this wasn't just happening to us. Other women, especially those living alone, had been experiencing similar events. One woman even told me how someone had been sneaking into her house at night, stealing food, moving through her space like a ghost. I don't know who's behind this or what their endgame is, but something is out there, something that's slowly creeping closer, more brazen with each passing day. The attempts at break-ins are becoming more frequent, more desperate. Whoever they are, they won't stop until they're caught. And when they are, I fear that won't be the end of it. This is a story my parents told me about an event that happened when I was a baby. I was a sickly child, plagued by health problems that kept my parents up at night. One evening when I was about 2 years old, I woke up crying uncontrollably. My fever was dangerously high, so they rushed me to the ER. But when we arrived, the doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong with me. It was one of those moments where the terror of the unknown gnawed at my parents. On the way home, something strange happened. My parents noticed a Buddhist monk walking along the side of the highway. He was dressed in a simple robe, his head bald and his face solemn. My parents, both fluent in Mandarin, asked if he needed a ride. The monk smiled and told them he was waiting for someone, urging them to hurry home. That night, my dad had a vivid dream. It was pitch black, and a disembodied voice whispered over and over, "This way, this way, this way." The next morning, for no apparent reason, my dad chose to take a back road to work instead of the freeway. Later that day, my mom saw a news report. A semi-truck had lost control on the freeway and caused a horrific accident, killing 6 people. It was the very freeway my dad had taken every other day. My parents didn't know what to make of it. Was it just a coincidence or something more? My grandma, however, was certain. She believed the monk was the Buddha himself, guiding our family and keeping us safe from harm that night. This is a story my roommate told me that still makes my skin crawl. It happened 3 years ago in 2022, during the week of Thanksgiving. My daughter's boyfriend had invited us to his family's house in Connecticut to celebrate the holiday. There wasn't much space in the house, so my daughters and I were relegated to the basement. The family was small, just my daughter's boyfriend, his grandmother, and his sister and her husband. A few more family members were supposed to join, but since we arrived late that night, I didn't meet anyone else right away. The first night in the house was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable, like something was slightly off. I chalked it up to being in a new place. But then, Thanksgiving morning arrived and I was up early as usual. At 7 a.m., I was the only one awake in the house. I wandered upstairs to the kitchen and settled into a high chair at the breakfast bar, nursing a cup of coffee, the stillness of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. That's when I saw him. A little boy, no older than 6 or 7, came down the stairs, wearing pajamas that looked too big for him. He quietly opened the fridge and rummaged around, then grabbed a juice box and walked back upstairs. I couldn't help but smile at how cute he was. I thought about how his innocent little face would light up when he joined the others for Thanksgiving dinner. But later, during the celebration, I asked almost absent-mindedly, "Hey, where's the cute little boy I saw this morning?" The moment the words left my mouth, everything went still. The grandmother immediately pulled me aside, her face turning pale. Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if afraid someone would overhear. "Shoo, you shouldn't be talking about him. My daughter's son died in front of this house a few years ago. He was hit by a car. I see him sometimes, but nobody believes me." My blood ran cold. I was speechless, my stomach twisting in knots. The cute little boy I had seen was dead. I couldn't shake the image of his smiling face from my mind. It was the first time I understood the fear that clung to the walls of that house. That night, my daughter and her boyfriend went upstairs to grab some yogurt. She clearly remembered grabbing a strawberry yogurt and setting a banana yogurt back in the fridge. They headed back downstairs, but when they entered the basement, their hearts dropped. The banana yogurt, one she had specifically put back, was sitting on their bed as if placed there intentionally. The unease grew heavier, suffocating. The air in that basement felt colder, thicker. By the next morning, we packed up and left, thankful to escape the oppressive weight of the house. But I'll never forget that feeling, the terrifying realization that something in that house wasn't quite right, and we had narrowly missed becoming part of its dark history. It's amazing how much we ignore our instincts when we're young and reckless. In my 20s, I was deeply immersed in the nightlife scene. One night, we went out to celebrate my friend G's birthday. She was having a great time, maybe too good a time, drinking too much too fast. The club was packed, the music thumping in our chests. At some point, G hit her limit. It was still early, so we walked her out to the car to let her sleep it off while the rest of us kept partying. We didn't think much of it at the time. It seemed harmless. The club was in a big city and public transportation was iffy late at night, so we figured we'd just let her sleep in the back seat until the night was over. But looking back, it was the dumbest decision we could have made. An hour or so later, we came back to the car and G was gone. The panic set in immediately. We searched the entire parking lot, ran up and down the streets calling out her name. The rain had started to pour, making everything feel heavier, like the city was closing in on us. I remember sobbing, my heart hammering in my chest. We can't go home until we find her, I kept saying to myself, the dread growing. It felt like we were chasing shadows. Then we saw her, a white figure walking down the sidewalk. G was wearing all white, so it had to be her. We pulled over, relief flooding through me. But when we got out of the car to ask what was going on, we saw her with a man we didn't recognize. He was tall, with a strange, unsettling aura around him. One of my friends approached them, asking if everything was okay. G seemed confused, disoriented. The man told us he was taking her to a hotel room. G confirmed it, but something about the whole exchange felt wrong, like we weren't getting the full truth. When we got G back in the car, one of us mentioned that the man had asked for money, and G didn't seem bothered by it. That's when it hit us. G had been picked up by a probable human trafficker. If we hadn't found her when we did, God only knows what could have happened. We drove away in stunned silence, the weight of what we had almost lost crushing down on us. That night still haunts me, the what-ifs gnawing at my mind. We were lucky, but that lucky break could have turned into something much darker if we hadn't listened to that gut-wrenching feeling that told us something was terribly wrong. These stories are just a glimpse of the chilling realities that exist in the world around us. If you've experienced something eerie, something you can't explain, share it with us. Don't forget to subscribe and stay updated on more terrifying true stories that will make your blood run cold. You won't want to miss what's coming.